All right. So that was actually excellent because we're kind of in the same industry at the moment. I mean, you're designing, I work in telco. So different sides of pretty much the same problem because, as Aga said, the world of telco is all about declining margins. It's all about things that used to be a really, really good industry to be in and are now slightly less good. And a couple... but we have a solution. So that's why I'm here today. And because, of course, a couple of years ago, Milan wrote a lovely book, and I forced myself to read it, and I'm glad that I did. You should all do it too. And my current organization is undergoing this kind of transformation. So we didn't actually use your methodology. But what I've tried to do is, not quite retrospectively, but because the transformation is still ongoing, but to look back at what we've done and where we're going through the lens of the enterprise design framework, and to try and figure out what we should have done differently, what things worked well. It's a very good framework for viewing how things are interconnected to each other and how they end up expressing into the world and affecting one another. And even, I suspect, when you get a design team in place, the process looks like neither of these pictures. Because, not least, we don't really know where B is. We don't know where we're headed. We don't know. We may have some idea where we think it should be, but actually we have no idea. It's something that emerges through the process. And actually, we have a very shaky idea of where we are today. We have, again, an idea in our heads, but actually how much that reflects reality is anybody's guess, and you may never find out. So I work in enterprise architecture, and the path that we take through the world looks a little bit more like this, but even less regular than this, because this is a nice spinning pendulum. It goes all over the place. You can't see the path because there's a table, but anyway. In reality, this pendulum is not actually hanging from a fixed point. The point is moving because the target keeps changing. And it's not got just one nice force of gravity working on it. There's lots of things changing in the world around it. So that's even the ideal project plan, but in reality, your design is going to look completely different. And in part, this is because the importance of design and of architecture to an organization, the actual need for it may be constant, but the perception of the need for it comes and goes. So part of our big transformation is from being effectively quite a large organization into being a startup. And so we're rapidly creating lots and lots of new things, exploring new spaces, finding new ways of doing business. And so architecture and design is often perceived as something that's getting in the way of people who just want to get out and do things. And so if the pendulum just went back and forth, we're probably in a slightly down phase. One of my colleagues said that we have more architects in the business than ever and less architecture than ever. So it's a little bit normal. So, transformation that I'm talking about is a new company called Connected World Services, which we, as it kind of suggests, we connect things. In particular, we connect mobile phones, tablets, and things with service providers and networks and plans and things. It's both an old business and a new business, and the old business you may have heard of. In the UK, we're Carphone Warehouse. 25 years ago, we founded that. And 18 years ago, we had our first international expansion into France, where we became the phone house because we realized that Carphone Warehouse was a bit of an anachronism, which actually it was 25 years ago as well, because 1989 was the year that Motorola released the first flip phone. So phones had started already to come out of cars. They had batteries that lasted at least half an hour. They were great. But we became the phone house in Europe. And then 5 years ago, we started working with Best Buy Mobile. I don't know why I said 5, it's longer than that. So Best Buy are the world's largest retailer of electronic doodads products. They are very good at taking boxes, buying them for one price, selling them for slightly more, high volume, low margin. And they will sell you a mobile phone. But Like a lot of electronic retailers, they're not so very good at it because they don't know how to explain to a customer how the bewildering variety of handsets, as we saw, matches up with the tariffs and the plans and the options and the bolt-ons for the right things. And even when they manage to sell it, they then forget that they've sold it because the whole rest of their world is about tracking the margin of the physical thing as it goes through the supply chain. And in the mobile retailing world, it's all about tracking the contract and the ongoing revenue and the things that are coming from all sorts of places to make that transaction a success. We don't own that in the US anymore. We sold our half of it. We still have it in China and other places around the world. Last week, we opened a bunch of stores for Samsung, and we're working with people everywhere. But anyway, combination of an old business and a new business. This is pretty much what it looks like, which is a little bit blurry, but anyway. What we are doing is we're taking the cash flows from the business that we had as a retailer, and we are strapping them to the new business. We're more or less forgetting our booster rocket. At some point, that will get dumped into the ocean. But what we're trying to launch is this new space shuttle type business that will go out of the atmosphere and make us all rich. Or it will explode, because space shuttles sometimes do. But it is very exciting. Because what we're now doing is we're selling products, or we're selling services. We're selling ourselves as a service, which is a completely different business model. And selling it is hard, conceiving it is hard, getting a client is hard, and operating it after we've got clients is hard. And it's probably an elevator of hardness that we are only just beginning to find out. So I'm going to talk quickly about what mobile phone retailing looks like, which you've probably heard a little bit about, because most retail looks, like we said, you buy stuff from a manufacturer, you ship it somehow to the customer, whether that's through a website or a store or Salesforce. You can do anything you like, but somehow you do that, and hopefully you get paid slightly more for it from the customer than you paid for it. And in that scenario, our profit depends on how good our supply chain is. But of course, our core business is selling network contracts down at the bottom there, and we get some commission for that. And sometimes, increasingly, because of margin pressure on them and on us, a lot of those are becoming revenue shares, so that we actually have a lifetime interest in you joining that company, joining that network, not just an enormous payment at the point of sale. So, of course, customers are hopefully paying for those contracts, which you have to manage. So what we are doing, actually, is we're stepping outside that box altogether. Whereas previously, we had been just the retailer. And you might have come to us as trusted advice to bring these two things together and sell you something that hopefully you believe is the right thing for you, and not just that we have lots of stock, though that happens as well. But Connected World Service is stepping out and not being the retailer. We are creating retailers. We're working with MediaMarkt, and as we worked with Best Buy, and we're helping them do the types of things that we used to do. Whereas with Best Buy Mobile, what we did is we sent a team of people, we built new systems, we integrated their systems. It's very difficult to scale sending teams of people around the world. And so what Connected World Services is doing is building a platform that, with APIs and all sorts of new magic, that means that people can plug into their existing operations, get the benefits of what we do, but in a way that we can sell to lots and lots of people. I mean, if you pulled your phone out of your pocket, there's an excellent chance that we are talking with either the manufacturer or the network that it's on or the retailer where you bought it. So this is scaling faster than I would have imagined. And of course, that's of value to these people, so they will give us some money. But I think Dion said something earlier about things shifting from transactions to relationships. And that's very much true here. Because even though our immediate cash flow from helping retailers sell connected products is probably on a transaction basis, sometimes a joint venture, but by and large it's transactional. We have visibility of all the information and the relationships flowing across this entire network, which then means that we can sell that on and provide insights to manufacturers about how different handsets are perceived and how they get sold and what tariffs they work with, and to take that knowledge out of one market and then be able to sell that information into another market. So there should be some good things. But this shift out of the box into being an independent is a fundamental shift of identity, which pretty much brings us into the enterprise design framework, because it starts and ends with identity if you follow the process at the end. And of course, there are 20 interdependent things on this list, and you'll probably be relieved that I'm not going to talk about each and every one of them. Milan's certainly relieved. But this is the first time I've gone through these slides, so if it turns out to be incredibly quick, it's good to know that we have some things that we could talk about afterwards. But I'm mostly going to talk about the top line and the bottom line and mush all the middle stuff into one big blob. So, these are the three big picture elements of the EDF: identity, architecture, and experience. And they seem like a good place to start, because identity is both how people perceive you, but it's also how you perceive ourselves. And that is an enormous shift for us, because we've effectively taken what was an internal IT department and we have pulled it out and made it its own business. It feels like about a decade ago, everybody wanted to pull out their IT departments and start selling services to the outside world. And this is effectively what we've done, is the thing that used to be group operations, which included IT and a bunch of business stuff, has been elevated to being effectively the business unit in the organization. Which also means we need to re-establish our identity in the world of business. So we've done this in a couple of ways. We've very much leveraged the fact that we're perceived as being the leading retailer, so we've held a couple of conferences, like this one, but bigger, much bigger. But again, with people coming from all over the world, across Europe and beyond, to learn about selling mobile phones. So it is very much about establishing ourselves in their minds that we are people who know what we're talking about, and it's also our opportunity to showcase the demos and how we might sell things and the design prototypes and all those kinds of things. So one interesting question about identity is for me, is we spend a lot of time thinking about what we want to become and how we're perceived and all those kind of things. And we think about the new things, but we spend less time thinking usually about the things that we want to remain constant, the things that aren't changing, or the things that we're deliberately leaving out. And identity is tricky, very difficult to think about, because the things that we think of ourselves as, we generally can't step outside, and I can't perceive that we might be different, because it's just the way we've always done things. So it's very, very difficult if we identify ourselves as something to then reason about it. This is just going to be tricky, I'm sorry. But yeah, identity transformations are hard for exactly this reasons, because our own identities are fundamentally illegible to us. So this is probably where external consultancies come in really, really handy, because they help us answer the right questions, to think about ourselves slightly. And there is usually that gap where you have a difficult conversation where you go, oh, screw you, that was completely wrong and awful. And then you come back the next day and discover that actually it was really, really helpful. But our initial reactions are very often that push it away, because thinking about these things is both hard and painful. And of course, architecture. It's allegedly what I do. But the structure of everything changes when your identity changes. The purposes of things change. Sometimes you get to keep what you already have, but often the reasons that you now have it are different than the reasons that you had when you created it. So it's changing, again, your perception of what you have, not necessarily the physical or systems or things that you've got. But it does change everything from, I don't know, it's systems and integrations, but also relationships that you have. So the things that we procure are completely different than the things we procured for ourselves. And the way that we procure them is different, because we don't know what we need yet. I mean, we have some clients that are live on our old systems. we have a client that's about to become live on the first version of the new system, and we are already, only a year or so in, we've got next generation architecture coming along because the first version was written not quite for a single client, but we learned things as we did it, so it needs redoing. And the center of that is knowing that we don't know. Knowing that we will need to sell these systems to people that we have not yet met, in countries we've never been to, and we need to scale it in ways that we absolutely have no idea what we're going to need. And that's the kind of thing that touches our procurement, is that it's no longer enough for us to go and buy a license for a market or a geography or whatever, and it's no longer enough for us to go pay somebody €1 million for something. We need to pay for it in a very modern way, the kind of way that you would build a startup. You pay for everything in a metered as you use it basis that doesn't care where in the world you use it. And we've had to either restructure or renegotiate or find completely new technologies in order to support that model, because it is so very different. And sometimes that means that their global head of sales comes in and talks to our CEO and then flies out again, because their sales structure is often not geared in traditional companies for selling things in the way that we need to buy them. And we're very lucky that we have some large friends and that we're a reasonably big company ourselves, that we can then have those conversations, because if we were any smaller, we wouldn't be able to do it. Equally, it might mean that we'd be faster and more successful because we would build in off-the-shelf, easier to find things. And of course, a lot of this is led by experiences. It's the experiences we want to offer to our customers and also to our clients, because customers are now suddenly one step more removed. We always slightly struggled with the concept of customer because our money flow, you might have given us some money at the point of sale, but actually most of our money comes from either the manufacturer or the network. So in that context, it's the old Facebook problem where to some degree our customers were the product, and so it's very difficult to then put those people at the heart of what you do, and all that kind of rhetoric is very difficult when they're not tied to the actual profit flow. But at the same time, we're selling to clients and selling them on ways of making their customers' experiences work and smoothly, and to integrate into their existing websites or their existing stores in ways that let them do what we do, but that fit with them quite well. And some of what we do, and maybe this is why we've survived as a company, is that selling mobile phones is ridiculously complicated. It is, in the consumer's mind, it's something that should be simple. But in reality, there's lots and lots of moving parts, and you can only simplify it so far. I've been working for Carphone for 14 years, and we repeatedly get people coming in who try and sell us things, who go, "Oh yeah, I understand your business, it's simple, we'll just do this." And if you take too much complexity out, then what you're left with doesn't work. So somehow we can't eliminate it. We can try and minimize it to make sure the complexity is in the right place and make sure that we expose it in ways that are relatively easy to use. But you can't actually push down too hard on it. It's as though complexity is some kind of waterbed. And if you do push down on it in one place, it will emerge in some other place. And the place that it normally emerges is in your people, because they're filling over the gaps in what your systems do. And you generally never actually find that out until you outsource them or make them redundant or something inadvisable. So that's kind of the three big picture elements, and they seem in my mind to be in a cycle kind of like that, where you might decide that because you're changing identity, you need to change what your architecture looks like, which in turn changes the experiences that are possible or easy, or the flavor of them, if you like, which in turn then shapes people's perceptions of you and your perception of yourself, and it kind of goes in that main cycle. You can short-circuit in a couple of places, but for the most part, I think that's it. Which brings us into the middle. which I pulled out this icon not because it's operations, but because it's a picture of a factory. And that is one of the big shifts in our current organization that we're right in the middle of, is there's a thing right in the middle that we're calling the product factory. And that is new for us, because always before we've done projects. We've conceived them, we've delivered them, we've documented, we've thrown the documents away, we've hoped that they work, and we've operated them. But it's in-house IT runs mostly projects. Sometimes the same people are around at the end, sometimes they're not. So we now have a product factory. And you often hear factory as a metaphor for all sorts of things in architecture. But what people generally forget is that the thing that you're architecting is the factory itself. It's not the product that comes out the other end. That's important, and it gets designed, and hopefully somebody's thought about it. But the primary effort when you're using a factory metaphor is the architecture of the factory itself. So what kind of factory are we building? I looked on the internet. There's lots of factories out there. This one's a bit dim and dingy and foreboding, but it does have a moat. And one of the important things about our factory in our new world is that we need some moats. So we have got some patents that have been applied for. We're very much looking to exploit the network of relationships and try and understand the information flow so that we can build competitive moats, because it's very difficult to piece all that information together. It's very difficult for us to negotiate with clients that we should have access to some of the information that they think we should have thrown away. And so how far can you keep it? How much do you have to anonymize? All of that feeds into what we then will be able to turn into future products. Okay, I think. Whoa, what have I done? That's no good. Sorry, pop-ups. Right, so we're not going for derelict, we're going for pretty, maybe. So this is the Hoover factory in Perivale in London. It used to make vacuum cleaners. It's all very pretty, and that is also the kind of factory we're building, because this, more than anything I've ever worked on, has been driven from the outside in. It's very user experience driven. There's been lots of prototypes, lots of shininess, lots of focus on the functional face of it, to the detriment of some of the things that will actually make it work. But we have definitely focused on pretty. And I think that's in part because of the people we got on the team as it began. And in the most extreme case of prettiness, we'll have somebody who's on the product team. They'll have an idea for something, they'll draw a sketch, and they'll go straight to the developer and it'll get built without necessarily considering whether everything else is going to hang together. We're also, this is a refinery in Japan that is almost as bright as the room, but it's ultra-modern, which is also the kind of factory that we're building. Because part of the next generation architecture is all about exposing things with I don't know, RESTful APIs. There's hypermedia seems to get thrown around a lot, which effectively is an evolution of the HTTP type interfaces, where you could take your website and in theory put a couple of libraries in it that call us, that then describe to you how it should behave and what the flow should look like and what fields you need to capture for a particular network's credit check, and then how to activate it at the end and when to call off to your stock check services. Because we're also creating a line between systems that belong to us and systems that belong to our clients. Because we're going into places that already have customer bases, that already have websites, that already have supply chains. We will completely fail if what we're trying to build is a silo of our own, of just build our package, install this. That'll work for some small mom and pops, but we're not there yet. We're still in big enterprise sales, semi-custom integration stuff. And that means that we need to work with all their existing systems. And so part of next generation architecture is trying to make that integration as smooth as possible so that there's very little to be done. And ultra-modern, I think, is also where the procurement thing I talked about earlier comes in, where we need to buy our things in a way that matches how we sell them, that doesn't constrain how we're going to grow. And of course, some factories look like this. which is less nice. But we do have a densely packed organization full of lots of people. My team has turned out in the most recent shift. I've got about a third of it is works directly for me for the same company. About a third of it works for a partner organization, but onshore, and a third of it is offshore, which we haven't quite figured out how to do architecture with yet, but I've got them, so that's the first task. And we do have desks that look kind of like that. Somebody measured them up and compared them to the EU regulations about how much space a chicken needs to have, and the chicken wins. But even though these factories are designed for repeating, to make certain outputs and outcomes replicable, that's what factories do at their best. What they think of as the outcome that they're trying to achieve changes, but they're trying to make things replicable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's low skill or that it's high labor or cheap or necessarily even monotonous. So if we get this part right, then we will get some of the engagement that Dion was talking about, because the work should be interesting even if the outcomes are a little bit more constrained and quality controlled. And we do have to take the architecture team for a particular product, and we need to co-locate it with the engineering team and the build team and all the rest so that they become a little bit more focused on a single product, that they are delivering the sales application as opposed to, say, the activation platform or the integrations or the reporting. And sometimes you end up with happy workers. These ones work for Tate & Lyle, or did. And some of that is because we don't know who those people are. Some of them will be our customers, some of them will work for our clients. And this I don't know, factory gate, I suppose, is just one of many touch points that they're going to interact with us. When we have fewer and fewer touch points with customers in our new world, where previously we owned the shops, you would walk in, we owned the call centers that you would phone into, we could control the experience across all of that. And we, as Connected World Services, now have very, very few direct interactions with the customers. So we have to step back and do a lot more introspection to see how are they actually using the sales applications and the websites, what do they spend time looking at, what seems to be confusing them, and kind of get our information indirectly, whereas previously I don't want to call it lazy, but we could have had a slightly more direct approach and believed that we were getting direct information. And that's going to change. And of course, factories have got side effects. They sit in silos, they pollute things. You know, there are all sorts of towers that ought to work seamlessly together. But they have byproducts. They've got waste, they've got unexpected effects. They create technical debt and architecture debt and enterprise debt and all sorts of things that you want to fix later if you remember. And so for the first time in the history of my working for this company, we are starting to track the decisions that we made that we knew we were making for expedience, that we wanted to rectify later. And they get tracked through a backlog. And there's a weekly backlog meeting that says, okay, are we going to do this functional thing or are we going to fix that thing that we know we should have done better? And sometimes it suddenly becomes better because the volume of business you're doing in a particular place demands that you now do it in a different way. And that's also a change in mindset, because as a retailer, you generally throw things away because they're absolutely crap. They're not good anymore. That's why you throw them away. So as a seller of services and builder of product, we throw things away because they're no longer fit for the purpose that we built them. It's not that they weren't any good. And that's a fundamental shift. Persuading people to turn a system off, they go, oh, well, it must have been terrible. But actually, maybe it was great. It's just not great anymore. And we tend to run things into the ground. Our existing legacy systems are running on alphas, DEC alpha machines. It's running OpenVMS. It's written in a 4GL language called Uniface. It's technology that pretty much nobody has seen since the last century, but it's kind of chugging away. And of course, factories, like products and things that you are just not good enough anymore, do kind of fall out of use. And you end up with things that look like this cement factory, hopefully, because Ricardo Bofill did an excellent job of turning this into somebody's house. So legacy can be beautiful, which is lucky for us because we do have clients that are on all manner of versions of systems, and we're already in a situation where we have to take the stuff that a couple of months ago we thought was new and turn it into old. So we will have one client that is running different versions of the application in different countries, which then means it would be very challenging to provide them with a central view at a group level of how all of that is performing. And it means that we need to have a migration plan at a point that makes sense to move them onto the newer system. And of course, our old client hasn't gone away. The booster rocket of Carphone Warehouse is still operating and still on the old system. But it means that we have teams of people who are dedicated to keeping that going and evolving it in a way that makes sense for that client. So we've got client zero and we've got all the others. And this is difficult to keep track. So you go into a meeting and you have to figure out whether you're discussing things from your perspective as a Carphone architect or as from a CWS architect. It's very confusing. And to help reduce that confusion, we have different PowerPoint templates. So it's very handy as part of context setting. As you start going, someone starts presenting something. If the title slide has got the right branding on it, it helps you shift into going, okay, we're discussing this from this perspective. If I was talking to you as your service provider, I would say this thing, but actually the best answer for you is this other one. Which leads into rendering. Excellent. Because rendering, the appearance that things take in your organization change depending on the purpose that you have. And PowerPoint templates are just one sign of that. But all the structures need to change, the way they appear in people's worlds change. And unfortunately for us, the most visible thing is going to be the signs and the appearances. Is that we've also become invisible in our new change. We used to participate directly in the lives of customers. Carphone Warehouse in the UK has something ridiculous like 83% brand recognition. It's a household name, and yet Connected World Services is not known by anybody and will not be known by anybody. The internal brand is Honeybee. We held a naming contest in which the technical team all put forward names. This is the one that passed. It's got a lovely logo. But happily, bees are a rich metaphor for naming all sorts of things, from subsystems to processes to making really bad puns. So it suits reasonably well. But our clients don't generally like the name. So Carphone Warehouse, it is called Pinpoint. Other clients call it other things. This brand is used for selling and internally, but it's not used actually outside the company. So I don't know whether it makes a success or not. And of course, we no longer have very many things in our world. We used to have stores, those are things, and we used to pay a lot of attention to the stores that we had. And now it's our clients who've got stores. And so the attention we pay is sometimes through consultancy and helping them set up their stores in a way that helps customer flow and all the rest. But it's a little bit different. And of course, our world is centered around handsets, which are things. But again, they're things that somebody else generally manufactures or designs or puts together. The closest, the most visible success in the handset market that we ever had is, if you're in the UK, you may remember the pink Motorola Razr flip phone, which was an enormous bestseller, and we chose the color pink, so it's the only thing we ever did. And of course, we show what we have done regularly internally. So there are lots of prototypes, lots of demos. So every couple of weeks, when the teams have delivered something, there is a public internal demo of the new sales system. So people come along, they comment, they see what's going on, they see what has been done to it for the different clients, while what's kind of staying the same. So I looked around the office for things, and this is what I could find. So internal things. We have got business cards that reflect the branding. We've got little notebooks with the logo on, and we handed out loads and loads of stickers. So you see stickers on people's laptops and on doors and all sorts of things. Stickers are different sizes. But in the realm of things, it's not very thing-like. But we have places, or we used to have places, because we used to have stores. We used to have stores and offices, and now we just have offices. And those offices have got multiple clients in them. So we've changed them a little bit. They look something more like this than they used to, because some of our new clients are quite concerned about having information that might belong to them wandering around a building that might belong to one of their competitors. Which is mutual, it turns out. So even though we've created a little fence inside our main head office, there's people there going, wait a minute, I can't get in to see their stuff, but we're sharing the same company restaurant, we're sharing all the rest of the facilities. Does it mean that you will have people from my competitor coming and potentially walking past my desk and seeing something that I would prefer not? So I don't know how long we're even going to be in the same building, but for now, we've got both physical segregation and some co-location, and everybody is moving desks, which of course causes no disruption whatsoever. So that is a little bit of everything. There we go. Back to normal. And so is that... Has it been useful to look back through that? Did I wish that we had done more of it sooner? Yes. That's the obvious right answer for this conference, isn't it? But it is genuinely useful. In like a lot of frameworks, even if you don't follow them, what they provide you is the things that you should think about. So you want to steal it and you want to use it for your own purposes, but you don't necessarily want to follow what EDA does with it slavishly, because what you do with it, you can then discuss with them, and their processes will get better as a result. And of course, the result that you get is going to depend in part on where you want to end up, which is the traditional architect answer. There are no firm and right answers. It depends very much on where it is you want to get to and what you think is important. And the final lesson, I think, is ridiculously important, is that it's the trying too hard is what causes us difficulty. If we relax a little bit, if we play a few more games along the way, if we allow ourselves to explore and not get wedded to our preconceived or notions, or too defensive when something pokes a little bit too deep and touches our identities, we have to design, as Dion said, for loss of control. Because if we try and control it, actually it's the controlling that will make us lose control and screw up our outcomes altogether. It's really hard, but we actually have no choice. Thank you.